Hello, federal employees. This is Sierra with Plan Your Federal Retirement. Thank you for joining me on today's Follow-Up Friday, where I will be covering the highlights and action items from this week's episode. In episode 91, Micah and Tammy entrusted advisors JT Farron and Christian Sakamoto to take over the podcast and discuss cash flow and retirement income timeline. The retirement income timeline is a tool that we use with our clients. This can be drawn out or it can be inputted into a system to be in a generated report. Christian starts off with talking about how cash flow planning is a heartbeat of retirement planning and retirement income. Christian will ask clients how much are they making, and unfortunately he gets mixed answers and sometimes clients just don't know. Christian suggests instead of thinking about your gross salary and subtracting the deductions, simply ask the question of how much hits your bank account every couple of weeks when you get paid. He wants our clients to think of it that way. What hits your bank account? How much of that is really getting spent? And again, sometimes the clients don't know how much they're spending, and it might be all of it. But whatever is actually being spent is the right answer. We cannot plan retirement successfully without knowing how much you are making or how much you are spending. JT agrees that cash flow is a heartbeat of retirement. Knowing what you're spending is important because it is what needs to get replaced in retirement. Once we know that, we can identify all the different sources of income and how those change over time and where we can expect that money to come from. Christian adds that now that we have that all mapped out, now we have to understand the rules in retirement in order to retire under the FERS system, since there are so many different rules. First, there's a normal, immediate, unrelated pension in retirement in which you have to have a minimum retirement age, MRA, in 30, age 60 with 20 years of service, or age 62 with 5 years of credible service. For special provisions, there are a lot of different set of rules there. To qualify for postponed retirement, you have to retire at your MRA with at least 10 years of credible service. Anything else would be considered a deferred retirement. But really understanding the rules is super important when we're planning our retirement. Christian brings up that there are key dates in retirement that you need to understand not only the rules, but what your credible work history is. Christian says that he has a lot of meetings with clients where they're trying to figure out when they started with FERS, what agencies have they been with, were there any breaks of service, leave without pay, part-time work, all those different things. That's your retirement service computation date, your RSCD. If you look on your leave and earnings statement, your LES, you will see your service computation date, SCD, but that is only to determine what your leave status is. This is why we always recommend our clients get a copy of their certified summary of federal service, because that is the only official form that OPM will use to determine what your credible service is between all the different agencies that you've worked with. Christian wraps up by saying that now that we have our cash flow planning and the rules of which we can retire, the next step would be to create and develop the actual retirement income timeline. JT walks us through that. JT says that most federal employees are going to have three main sources of income, and we call this the three pillars. They are your FERS pension, your Social Security, and your investment income. When we identify all those sources and also how they change over time and the timeline on when the different sources of income will be triggered, what we are looking for is those gaps in income. The first common gap is when you take your FERS supplement, if you retire before the age of 62. Because then at age 62, that income goes away. It turns into a pumpkin. Then looking at how you're going to replace that gap in income. The other really common gap that we see is if you are in a postponed retirement. This is where you separate from service and put your benefits on a shelf for later to include your health insurance and your pension. For example, if you're going to retire at age 57, but you postpone until age 60, the question becomes, how are you going to fill that income gap for that 3 years worth of income? Christian adds that the other thing that we're going to look at in planning is when to take Social Security, especially when the FERS supplement stops at age 62. But we have a lot of conversations with our clients about waiting to take Social Security to even later and up until age 70. The retirement income timeline is a great tool for planning on when to take Social Security and filling those gaps. Christian has an example of a client that he had this week. They are dual fed, and he showed two different versions of the retirement income timeline. The first was what he called the default plan with both retiring at age 62, but they also turned age 62 at different times. The older spouse, the plan is to wait until age 62 because they would get an extra 10% increase on their pension. But they would receive no first supplement and there would be a gap in income. So Christian was able to show that to them on the timeline. They knew that they would need to use TSP or IRA distributions in order to fill that gap. But during that meeting, they also asked Christian the question of, okay, if I retire at age 62, this is what this looks like, but can you also show me on this timeline how these things change and what my options are if I retire at age 61? So Christian was able to build out that retirement income timeline and show them what things would look like if they retired a year earlier. After the meeting, Christian was able to work on that retirement income timeline, showing them what it would look like if they retired at age 61 and those differences. But he also was able to show them the difference in health insurance as well, because that changed depending on the age that they chose to retire. This was a great opportunity to show the client their options and to help guide them through what the right date for their retirement is for them and how can we make this work for them. JT adds that it really puts things in perspective and it really helps people and the clients that are super visual and love to be able to see things and how the different sources of income look on paper. JT also had an example of a client wanting to turn on his Social Security at age 62, but it really came down to a cash flow question. JT was able to use the retirement income timeline to show the different sources of income and how those changed taking Social Security at different ages. And it turned out that the client didn't really actually need to start Social Security at age 62, especially since there's such a huge benefit to postponing Social Security if you were able to. This was hugely valuable for them to see it on paper and be able to answer that question. Christian realizes that they must have been meeting with a lot of dual feds this week because he also had another couple who wanted special provisions and retiring at 50, and the other is going to be working a little bit longer in order to reach their 20 years of credible service. He asked the client and had a conversation with them about, if you're leaving special provisions at age 50, are you done with work, or are you going to go on to a second career? He was able to do the timeline with one spouse retiring and the other spouse continuing to work, and then update the timeline to show that additional planned income that was going to come in. But with that additional income, they don't want to have that lifestyle creep. So really thinking about it and being intentional with that additional income. JT agrees that this is a great example, and they have so many stories about how the retirement income timeline can produce an aha moment for our clients. This podcast is all about action items for our listeners. JT's action item is to know your net income and how much you're spending per month. Christian's action item is to draw out your retirement income timeline for the next 10 years. And when are you going to retire, and thinking about the 10 years after retirement as well. Ask yourself the questions of how much income is coming in now, what can we reasonably expect your pension to be, and when are you going to turn on your Social Security? JT has a second action item, and that's to plan for health insurance, because not only can there be a huge gap in income, but there could also be a gap in your health insurance depending on when you choose to retire, especially if you choose to postpone. My action item is to re-listen to the original episode 91 to hear the great conversation between Christian and JT. And share this podcast with a friend. With your help, we can achieve our goal of helping 1 million federal employees just like you. Until next time, happy planning.